Hello friends, and welcome back. After the horrible debacle of the Lucio Fulci episodes, where Sony blocked all the footage from the Beyond, I took a little break from the video nasties. However, today I'm back, and I have here our very first Section 3 nasty that we've covered in the series so far. This is 1973's Pigs, better known in some circles as Daddy's Deadly Darling. The UK Nasties release was from Ivor Film Services, a company that is mostly infamous for putting on a little Oscar statuette into their logo, which is very inappropriate considering the kind of movies that they tended to put out. But wait a second, you say, what is a Section 3 nasty? Well, you see, the Obscene Publications Act has a couple different ways that obscene materials can be prosecuted. A Section 2 prosecution means that the government will actually seize the obscene material and then can actually apply criminal charges to the person who is distributing it. This can include both jail time and fines. All of the real video nasties were prosecuted under Section 2. Now, Section 3 states that the warrant pleas can seize and destroy obscene materials. In other words, they can raid a video shop, pull out all the videos that they think might be obscene, and then confiscate them. The burden of proof under seizures through Section 3 is much lower than Section 2, but there are no criminal charges. The only thing that can happen is that the material can be seized and destroyed. So there were a total of 82 films on the Section 3 Nasties list, and it's a really odd and interesting list, in some ways more interesting than the Section 2 Nasties. It includes both completely mainstream horror movies like Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Scanners, and Suspiria, and also tons of hopelessly obscure movies like Don't Answer the Phone, Headless Eyes, The Black Room, and oddly, The Toy Box, a completely bizarre sexploitation film written and directed by Ronald Victor Garcia, who later became a successful TV cinematographer and director of shows like Twin Peaks, Gilmore Girls, and the recent Hawaii Five-0 series. As for Pigs, it was restored and reissued by Vinegar Syndrome, so we can finally see the damn thing in its original version for the first time since about 1973. All previous versions, either VHS tapes or DVDs, just looked like utter crap. And in the UK, 88 Films recently released it on Blu-ray, so it's available there for the first time in about 30 years or so. So let's go ahead and get started.
Daddy, tell me the piggy story again.
This little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy had...
He feeds those pigs dead people, and then he eats the pigs.
They got used to eating human flesh. I gotta do it. I'm sorry.
I didn't do anything, Daddy. I didn't do anything.
Don't you touch me. Don't you touch me. I don't like pigs touching me.
Waiting for you. At your neighborhood theater from Cinevid. Rated R. No one under 17 admitted without a parent or guardian.
If the main appeal of Pigs is the gruesome spectacle of pigs eating human beings, then this movie wastes no time in letting us see the good stuff. This pre-credit sequence begins with Marc Lawrence's character Zambrini hauling in a dead guy's body into his shed, and then preparing to chop it up and feed it to his pigs. As he does this, he explains to the guy that he doesn't like doing this, but his pigs won't eat anything else ever since a drunken guy once stumbled into their pen and ended up getting devoured. This is actually a much repeated myth, that animals or even humans develop an insatiable craving for human flesh once they taste it.
You know, the first time it happened, it was an accident. They got loose in the field. There was a drunk. He was asleep.
Pretty much all the marketing around this movie focused on this one element. The UK VHS tape, of course, featured the tagline, "Pigs will eat anything, even evidence." The original theatrical posters claimed, once pigs tasted blood, no one could control their hunger. Though man-eating pigs isn't really what this movie is about. This particular version we're seeing today bears the name The 13th Pig, an early title which ended up being changed to just plain Pigs once it reached theaters. Now, Pigs has a very long and strange distribution history, and it ended up with multiple edited versions being released over the years, some of which are very strange, as we'll see a bit later in this video. As the credits roll, we hear the main title theme, written and sung by Charles Bernstein. Pigs has a very early soundtrack from Bernstein. In 1974, he would achieve a certain amount of fame for his music for the Burt Reynolds movie White Lightning, which later ended up in the Kill Bill soundtrack, with Bernstein becoming a pretty prolific movie and TV composer, with perhaps his most famous score being the one for Nightmare on Elm Street. In many ways, Pigs looks like one of the many regional horror movies that appeared out of nowhere in the 1970s, but this isn't quite the case. This was written, directed, and produced by Marc Lawrence, a veteran Hollywood actor and director who had been involved in the film business for 40 years at the point that Pigs came out. And this was shot not in the backwoods of some part of rural America, but near Lake Piru, a short drive up the coastline from Los Angeles. And while a number of the faces are unfamiliar, Pigs did count Jesse Vint among its cast, a TV actor who appeared in a number of major studio releases. Most notably, he appeared in 1974's Macon County Line. So while Pigs was an independently produced and distributed movie, it's definitely in a different league than something like Frozen Scream. So the question is, if Pigs wasn't really about man-eating pigs, then what is it about? Well, it's mostly a psychological drama / horror movie based around the intersection of the lives of the two main characters. Marc Lawrence's Zambrini, the owner of a rundown diner in the middle of nowhere, and the other character Lynn, a woman who is running away from, well, something.
Hmm?
I don't know. I wish I did.
Let him come here. Let him run away. What's the difference? Let him run. Nobody finds out. How did you sleep?
She is first seen hiding a nurse's uniform on the side of the road. She happens to stop at Zambrini's place and ends up taking a job as a server. Zambrini intuitively knows she is hiding something but doesn't press her.
I saw your sign outside.
Somebody after you?
Why would anyone be after me?
I didn't ask. Why? Just if.
Lynn settles into her new life, sleeping in a rather small, grimy room in the back of the diner. But it becomes clear that she has psychological issues, suffering hallucinations of Zambrini killing her.
One little girl as deadly as can be.
Zambrini himself is sort of an outcast. Some of the other locals suspect his involvement in some grave robbing incidents, and they theorize that he kills people and feeds them to his pigs. His neighbors, who are also not quite right in the head, claim Zambrini's hogs get out of their pen at night and surround their house. They also pose the theory to the town sheriff, played by Vint, that the people that Zambrini kills turn into pigs, as if he were a modern-day Circe.
He feeds those pigs dead people, and then he eats the pigs.
Now, Miss Macy, where would you say?
And Circe, as you so recall, did so by serving Odysseus' men food and wine, whereas Zambrini owns a restaurant, and as we later learn, used to work for the circus. I'm not sure if this is a deliberate illusion or just a coincidence that I noticed. We get very little info about Lynn's past as the movie progresses, but we do get a hint of her familial problems, as Lynn at several points calls her father on a payphone, and the conversation's hinting at a complex relationship with her father.
Okay? Don't ask me where I am. Don't ask me where I am. I can't tell you. I can't tell you.
Lynn strikes up the acquaintance of the charming Sheriff Dan, as well as the considerably less charming Ben, a local oil worker and regular at Zambrini's cafe. Their date ends with Ben about to rape Lynn. Fortunately, Sheriff Dan happens to notice Ben's parked car, and Lynn leaves with him instead. Pig simmers with sort of a low-key tension up until about the halfway point, when Lynn, who appears to have had a sudden change of heart about Ben, invites him back to her room. Then, on the pretense of having sex with him, murders him with a straight razor, in the film's main scene of shocking bloody violence. Zambrini, discovering the murder, destroys the evidence by, well, I'm sure you know how, and becomes increasingly protective of Lynn, with an almost sort of like family-like bond growing between them. This is made all the more interesting by the fact that the actress playing Lynn, Toni Lawrence, is Marc Lawrence's daughter. In the second half, Sheriff Dan begins to seriously suspect that Zambrini may have had something to do with Ben's unexplained disappearance, as do Ben's co-workers, requiring the sheriff to put a halt to their plans for vigilante justice. Then this guy suddenly appears in town looking for Lynn.
Ever seen this girl before?
He and Lynn appear to be quite friendly, and he tries to convince her to come back with him. Zambrini learns that Lynn is an escaped patient from a mental hospital, which, if anything, only appears to increase his protectiveness of Lynn. Lynn's mental situation continues to decline. She kills again, which once again results in Zambrini feeding the body to his pigs. Eventually, the sheriff learns of Lynn's history and rushes to the cafe to find her. As Zambrini tries to help Lynn escape, she murders him as well.
He's dead. He's dead, you understand? He's dead. Now forget about him.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
Let's go.
It's a lie. It's a lie. Lie! I love you.
In one final call to her father, we discover Lynn's phone conversations with her father are hallucinations on her part, as she has been calling a disconnected number.
I love you.
You have reached a disconnected number.
Daddy,
This is a recording.
I love you.
The ending is filmed somewhat ambiguously. We see the pigs burst out of their pen, as Zambrini's neurotic neighbors had been claiming. The next day, the sheriff reveals to the audience Lynn's history, that her father had attempted to rape her as a child and she killed him, thus resulting in her incarceration in a mental institution.
She killed her father. She murdered him. He tried to rape her when she was a little girl. Crazy family.
Now, Lynn is nowhere to be found at this point, but as Zambrini's pigs are hauled off, their number has mysteriously increased from 12 to 13, which finally explains the title of the film, The 13th Pig.
That's funny, Sheriff. What's that? You got 13 now. You sure? Yes, sir. Tell you what I'll do. I'll send you one for Christmas. No, thanks.
Lynn's necklace is found in the pen, thus suggesting Lynn's transformation into a pig.
Anyone you know?
Now, every time we see a movie, we might wonder how it was made, but we might also wonder why was this movie made. In the case of Pigs, the evidence we have indicates that this was not a passion project, but instead the motivations were purely financial. So let's take a look at the man who made Pigs, its producer, writer, and director, and co-star, Marc Lawrence. We'll also have a look at Pigs' rather convoluted release history, which found it being constantly re-edited and renamed multiple times. If you are at all familiar with American cinema from the 30s until the 90s, you've almost certainly seen Marc Lawrence in something. He was an enormously prolific character actor. IMDb credits him as appearing in 221 movies and TV shows ranging from 1931 to 2002. He was born as Max Goldsmith in New York City in 1910, near the very beginning of the American film industry. He took an interest in acting, joined a stage company, and eventually moved to Los Angeles with a friend of his to become a screen actor. His earliest recorded screen appearance is as an extra in Paramount's If I Had a Million, an anthology movie consisting of several segments each directed by a well-known director. Among them were Ernst Lubitsch, James Cruise, and Norman Taurog. If I Had a Million is an interesting little movie. It's about a dying millionaire who decides to hand out $1,000,000 checks to a number of people picked randomly from a phone book. The tone varies from segment to segment, from harrowing to silly to heartwarming, and features performances by Gary Cooper, Jackie Oakey, George Raft, and W.C. Fields in one of his earliest appearances in a sound film. Lawrence says he appears in James Cruise's segment, and sources list him as playing one of Gene Raymond's cellmates, but in the movie itself we definitely don't see any such cellmate. Lawrence remembers telling Cruise that Raymond was a rotten actor and that the part should be given to him instead. Now, it's quite possible that the print that currently exists is an edited reissue print and that it's missing some footage.
What are you doing? I want to go to the warden, not in there. It's a million, I'm telling you. I'm yelling at you and you won't listen to me. It's a million.
Throughout the 1930s, Lawrence appeared in countless movies for Paramount, Columbia, Warner Brothers, and Fox, and sometimes even in Poverty Row studios like Republic. Due to his physical appearance, he was often cast in gangster or criminal roles. He graduated from being an extra to small credited appearances, to even getting his name in small print on the posters. He was so good at playing gangsters and whatnot that he became friendly with real-life gangsters, with apparently Lucky Luciano taking kind of an interest in him. Now, while he was never a starring actor, he did get some pretty juicy roles in major pictures, such as Jeff Farnley, one of the more bloodthirsty members of the lynch mob in the Oxbow incident.
Me. I tell you now, whoever shot Larry Kincaid ain't coming back here for you to fuddle with your lawyer's tricks for 6 months. And then be let off because Davies or some other whining old woman claim he ain't bad at heart.
Or Ziggy, the gangster that Edward G. Robinson delivers the counterfeit money to in John Huston's Key Largo.
Well, it sure is well, pal. Hey, Rocco, you put on a little weight. Well, now, wait a minute. Look who's talking. Oh, look out.
And of course, he had a pretty major role as Copy the Bookkeeper, who plays a key role in the heist in Asphalt Jungle, also directed by Huston.
This transaction appearing in his books. I'm not risking anything. He's good for it in case of a run out. Then you haven't got a worry. No.
However, in 1951, Lawrence's life took a dramatic turn when he was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Lawrence himself says he was not really a communist, but that he simply attended meetings either to meet girls or simply because he was curious about what the communists had to say. Lawrence states that he was under intense pressure to name names, and when he did, he later justified this by stating that everyone he named had already been named earlier. Now, it's usually said that Lawrence was blacklisted after his testimony and unable to find work and moved to Europe. However, while he may have had difficulties finding work had he stayed in the United States, Lawrence says that he was terribly shaken up by the ordeal and had already booked a flight for him and his family to depart before he was scheduled to testify. Either way, he left the U.S. in April 1951, and as a recognizable American actor, Lawrence found work in Italy, essentially getting higher billing than he did in the U.S. Now, I mentioned the connection between pigs and Lucio Fulci. In Italy, Lawrence and his family became friends with Tota, the famous Italian comedian, and Tony Lawrence says that she was supposed to appear in a Tota film when she was around 4 years old, for a gag in which a woman gets put into one of those sauna steam boxes for too long and gets shrunk down to the size of a little girl. Tony was originally going to play the little girl, but it ended up not happening. And Fulci himself, of course, got his start writing and doing some assistant directing for Tota films. Tony Lawrence's appearance would have been around 1952 or so Fulci may have been involved in this movie. Lawrence really seemed to enjoy his life in Italy. His return to American-produced movies came in 1955 when he appeared in Robert Weiss's Helen of Troy, which was shot in Italy. In 1958, he moved to London, did some stage work, appeared in one British movie, and by sometime around the end of 1950 was back in Hollywood doing TV work. However, the Hollywood Lawrence returned to was a lot different than the one he left. Studios were producing fewer and fewer movies, and television had eaten into the audience for theatrical films. Lawrence went into directing for television, such shows as 77 Sunset Strip, M Squad, and The Lawman. Pigs is sometimes referred to as Lawrence's sole directorial work, but he actually produced and directed an independent film in 1965 called Nightmare in the Sun, starring Ursula Andress and John Derek, later the husband of Bo Derek. Oddly enough, Sammy Davis Jr. and Robert Duvall make brief appearances in this thing. So throughout the 60s and 70s and beyond, Lawrence continued to play small but memorable roles in both US and overseas productions until the early 2000s. He appeared in 2 James Bond movies, Man with a Golden Gun and Diamonds Are Forever, in which he gets one of the best lines.
Exceptionally fine shot.
I didn't know there was a pool down there.
He turned up in popular movies such as Marathon Man, the Goldie Hawn Chevy Chase vehicle Foul Play, and I suspect Quentin Tarantino was a fan, since Lawrence makes a cameo appearance in From Dusk Till Dawn.
What the hell do you want?
What do you think I want, you mean old bastard? I want a fucking room.
But Pigs was made at a time in the early 70s when Lawrence was getting 1 or 2 film roles a year instead of 10 a year like he was back in the 30s. His impetus for Pigs was apparently simply to make money and hopefully launch a career as a producer rather than an actor. To this end, he and his wife hammered out a script, originally under the title Menu for Murder. As luck would have it, his daughter Toni was in New York trying to make a career as an actress, and while she wasn't a seasoned veteran when she appeared in Pigs, she had gone to NYU on a full scholarship and studied under Olympia Dukakis. She only appeared in movies and TV sporadically after this, and she might be most well known as the wife of Billy Bob Thornton, or rather, one of Billy Bob Thornton's many, many wives, technically. Lawrence definitely filmed this thing on the cheap. It was shot in 10 days, presumably hiring his daughter saved him a bit of money, and Charles Bernstein was a friend of Lawrence's son, a painter who hung around with Jim Morrison and Bernstein during his UCLA days. In fact, Bernstein wasn't paid in cash for this. Instead, he traded the soundtrack for this painting done by Lawrence's son, which was originally painted for Fellini's film The Clowns. This kind of makes me wonder if Zambrini's circus background was thrown in simply so this painting could be used as a prop. Pigs was first released to theaters in the version that we're seeing here by a small distributor called Classic Films. The name Pigs was clearly intended to make the movie sound like another one of those killer animal movies of the early 70s, like Willard, Ben, or Frogs. Since it apparently did not live up to Lawrence's financial expectations, he ended up selling Pigs to a producer named William Rowland. From this point onward, Pigs would be constantly re-edited, retitled, and re-released in a dizzying number of versions. Rowland was an old Hollywood veteran who had supposedly produced and directed guys like Bogart, James Cagney, and various other Hollywood legends, though his credits on IMDb mostly seem to be a handful of shorts for Universal and a number of features for outfits like Republic and other small-time distributors. Rowland originally tried to market it as a thriller along the lines of Psycho, under the name The Secret of Lynn Hart, and then again under the name Lynn Hart, The Strange Love Exorcist, and finally just plain Love Exorcist. This was obviously done in an attempt to cash in on Warner Brothers' The Exorcist, which was bringing in unheard of amounts of cash in 1974. Rowland brought in Marc Lawrence to reshoot some new footage, which tries to explain Lynn's murderous behavior as being related to demonic possession, and maybe even tying it into the story of Jesus exorcising a bunch of demons and casting them into a herd of pigs. Fans of Italian horror will remember the exact same thing happened with Mario Bava's 1974 movie, Lisa and the Devil, when new possession-themed footage was shot, added into the movie, and then it was retitled House of Exorcism. Rowland seems to have had huge plans for Love Exorcist, estimating that it would make about $10 million at the box office, and he claimed that when it premiered at a drive-in in Bakersfield, it broke all the attendance records for that particular venue.
A secret. A Marc Lawrence film.
I'm going to guess that it fell far short of $10 million, And in 1977 it was sold again to someone named Donald Reynolds, another grindhouse drive-in type distributor, who again shot new footage and changed the name to Daddy's Girl. Unfortunately, the Daddy's Girl edit formed the basis of virtually every single version that was available until quite recently. All the VHS and poor quality DVD releases had some variant on the Daddy's Girl cut. The new Daddy's Girl footage is, quite frankly, absolutely awful and doesn't fit in at all with the original movie, making Daddy's Girl look much more incompetently made than the movie Pigs originally was. It begins with this montage of Lynn and her father using an actress who looks absolutely nothing like Toni Lawrence, and then cuts to more mismatched footage where a neighbor lady hears someone screaming, and we see Lynn's silhouette murdering someone. Just to tie all this together to make sure we understand, we look at a newspaper headline explaining that the father was murdered while attempting to rape his daughter. Bits of footage from Pigs are unconvincingly cut into the new footage, as we see Lynn committed to an insane asylum. The stand-in for Lynn looks so unlike Toni Lawrence that the whole thing becomes absurd, and based on the brief glimpses we get of her, people have stated that it looks more like a man wearing a really terrible wig. In Pigs, we never really learn how Lynn escaped from the hospital, but the new prologue shows that she stole a uniform while a nurse was banging a doctor, but doesn't explain how she opened the door to her cell. So in short, what this new prologue does is simply reveal the original ending of Pigs, that Lynn was an escaped mental patient who murdered her father when he tried to rape her. Basically explains all of her backstory at the very beginning of the movie. The fact that we know from the get-go that Lynn is homicidal and delusional, rather than simply a woman who is running from something in her past, completely changes the tone of the movie, and quite frankly ruins the element of suspense. For the new ending, the whole business about the extra pig is dropped, and instead we get footage of Toni Lawrence's stand-in chopping up a body, perhaps Zambrini's, and feeding it to the pigs in order to fake her death. We then see Lynn out on the highway looking for new victims. And this guy, I think, is actually played by the same actor who appeared as Lynn's father in the prologue. So while the original version of Pigs was never exactly a work of art, Daddy's Girl drags it right down into the gutter, which is a shame because the original movie Pigs definitely deserved a little bit better than this. Eventually, Daddy's Girl passed into the hands of Aquarius Releasing, the fabled New York City sleaze distributor responsible for Dr. Butcher MD and Seven Doors of Death. That was, of course, the reworked version of Fulci's The Beyond. Again, the name was changed, this time to Daddy's Deadly Darling. It got a few VHS releases under this name, and this was probably the most familiar title for this movie in the US. Even the Wikipedia page is titled Daddy's Deadly Darling, and IMDb incorrectly lists Daddy's Deadly Darling as the quote-unquote original title of Pigs. In the UK, of course, the Video Nasties tape was released as just plain Pigs, but with the brief opening montage part removed. The UK Pigs tape opens with the scene of the old lady witnessing the murder. Over the years, it was released under so many other titles: Horror Farm, Bloodpin, The Killer. At some point, Troma got the home video rights and released a DVD under the name Pigs, but just like every other home video release, it was an ugly, barely watchable variation of Daddy's Girl. The Vinegar Syndrome restoration is the first time in decades that Pigs has not looked absolutely horrible. I wouldn't quite call this a revelation. It's still not a beautiful picture, and since it was always pretty clear that the Daddy's Girl footage was not shot by the same people who were responsible for the rest of the movie, it's not like we are forced to somehow completely reevaluate the merits of the original film. One thing that did strike me while I was making this video is that while we would normally consider Pigs to be a commercial failure, an obscure horror movie that didn't live up to its creator's expectations, it did manage to stay in movie theaters for about 10 years, from 1973 to the early 80s, which is a pretty spectacular run when you think about it. As David Mamet has said, every movie makes money for someone. I like Pigs for the most part. The performances by the Lawrences are both quite good. Toni modulates well between the nice, charming Lynn and the psychotic killer Lynn, and Marc is basically doing Marc Lawrence, just like he did for decades.
Mr. Zambrini, an insane asylum.
So what? Everybody's sick. Everybody running away from everything. And what are you, a troublemaker? Huh?
There are a few things I don't like, however. Lawrence is not an experienced director. Pigs occasionally feels episodic, as if they didn't quite know how to edit all the footage into a cohesive whole, but it's full of great little moments.
What the hell are you doing here? What's this? Stay away, my animal.
Dan, that's Ben Sharp's dog.
And Lawrence is sympathetic to the characters. Even the bad guys have their moments of likability. It has some rough edges. At one point, Marc literally motions for the camera to come closer, and the sound editing is a bit annoying, as it alternates between really soft dialogue and then incredibly loud sounds of squealing pigs, which are often sort of overlaid on top of the action. And the use of fisheye lens close-ups to indicate mental imbalance is a bit trite, and there are also such cliche devices as Lynn putting on her lipstick, smearing it all over her face, again to sort of indicate mental insanity. I'd say Pigs works better as a series of individual moments rather than as a whole film.
Well, I guess I want you from the morning to the night.
So one question here, as always, is why did this end up on the Nasties list? Perhaps the idea of using farm animals to dispose of human bodies offended the authorities? Combining sex and violence was certainly one way to get on the Nasties list. I'm not quite sure if this scene is suggesting that Lynn castrated this guy with a razor. It is hard to say, but definitely the kind of thing that British authorities would not like.
Hey, listen.
So, regardless of whatever this film's merits are, Pigs in its original version is certainly a huge improvement over the bastardized versions that we've been stuck with for decades.
He gets busy on the weekends.
Next time we'll be looking at what I'm sure is the oldest movie on the Nasties list, and what is probably the most historically important film to be classified as a Section 2 Nasty, a pioneering horror movie whose creator sadly passed away in 2016. Until then, Happy New Year, and I'll see you soon.